There we go. How's everybody?
Well, thanks. How are you?
I am great. I am great. Right. I think we're just waiting on Commissioner Lawson. If we could just give us a couple more minutes and then we'll get started.
Hello, Commissioner Sally. So far, I only see you on. Do we have other commissioners here?
I don't believe we do. I know Commissioner Esposito is going to be absent from today's meeting. I'll be leading in her stead. And I believe we only have Commissioner Lawson as our other.
Well, let me check with him and see if he'll be joining us.
Okay. All right. I don't want to be all by my lonesome today.
I'm sure you can hold the fort down, but I will check. Hold on. Commissioner Sally, why don't we go ahead and get started? And if he's able to join us, he will jump on.
Okay, that sounds wonderful to me. So I would like to welcome everybody to our January 16th Policy Committee meeting. If you have not done so, please mute your phone. Anyone who does not mute their phone or the Teams link may be muted by the call moderator or removed from the call. Additionally, if you're not a board member or the CEO and her staff, we ask that you turn off your video. Just for purposes of the record, I'm just going to read a brief roll call. So Commissioner Esposito, who we know is absent today. Commissioner Lawson is not here currently, but may join. And I am Commissioner Sally. I'm here today in Commissioner Esposito's stead to chair policy today. All right, we have a pretty good agenda for us today. Specifically, we'll be going over ADF, which is Wellness, Nutrition, and Physical Activity Policy. We have 2 compliance reports to look at today, which is Policy JBA and then Policy GBB, and we'll take public comment. That'll round us out for the afternoon. So without further ado, I turn it over to the staff to lead us through a presentation of ADF for Wellness, Nutrition, and Physical Activity Policy.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Commissioner Sally. Thank you all in advance for your attention. I know it's hard. This kind of meeting can be hard on a snow day, so thank you in advance. And thank you, Rebecca, for sharing these slides. I am, as many of you know, Ann Rosenthal. I'm part of the Food and Nutrition Services team. I'm here, as you know, to review the proposed changes to Board Policy ADF, the Wellness, Nutrition, and Physical Activity Policy, more informally known generally as the district's wellness policy. Go to the next slide, please. I'll start by covering just some of the basics. First, as a reminder, we have a wellness policy both to promote our own goals as they're laid out in the blueprint and connected to wellness of our students, but then also to comply with the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, which is the federal school meals regulation that dictates everything we need to do to be in compliance as we operate our school meal program every day. This is an extremely far-reaching policy, as you've seen. The policy sets guidelines as listed here for health education, for nutrition education and promotion, for phys ed and physical activity, for nutrition standards, for meals served inside and outside the cafeteria, for behavioral health services, and for school-based wellness activities generally. Because it's so far-reaching, there is more than one office kind of in charge or focused on this policy and compliance. There are 3 key teams listed here. My team, the Food and Nutrition Services Department, but we work very closely with the Health and Physical Education team, as well as the Office of Health and Specialized Student Services, both to comply and to review this policy. Review and revisions also hinge on collaboration with a couple other parties listed here. So we have a kind of cross-cutting Health and Wellness Council that meets monthly with internal and external stakeholders whose work touches health and wellness of our students somehow. And this can include school-based health and wellness liaisons. So those are also listed here. I'll now talk a little bit about how each of these 3 key teams listed in blue here fit into the ADF puzzle. So starting with Food and Nutrition Services, as you know, we serve free meals to all students year-round, including over the summer. So we're proud that even since the pandemic, whereas national trends have shown many school districts really struggling to climb back up to pre-pandemic rates, we are making progress and climbing back pretty steadily. Last year, we served more than 12 million free meals, which represented a huge increase from the prior year. And this year, I actually got numbers just this morning that we have already served more than 5.3 million meals this school year. So we're proud of that. That's a very, obviously concrete way we contribute to students' health. But more broadly, we're focused also on farm to school and kind of food systems education. So our farm to school team operates or offers free programs, including field trips, in-school programs, school garden support, activity kits that are, again, all free to students and staff. Last year, our direct programs reached almost 9,000 students, and we anticipate that number to be much higher this year as we've added a few Food Corps fellows to our team. So again, we're thinking about big picture food systems education and kind of habit building for students and families. Finally, listed here, we have invested in various innovations and collaborations to promote health and wellness, including our student designed food truck. You'll see our Streets Cafe pictured here. This has served for a meal site in many cases of facilities emergencies like water main breaks or power outages in schools. And we've also been able to serve summer meals, both to students and families, which has been really exciting through the Streets Cafe. We have also worked with the Baltimore Museum of Industry on a partnership to highlight the voices of our school food service staff, which has been really exciting. And we lifted up some student artists as part of that as well. You can go to the next slide, please. Next, I'll talk a little bit about how the comprehensive health ed and phys ed teams work fits in. Very concretely, within academics, this team manages the skills-based health curriculum for kindergarten through high school students. So the core concepts and skills of our health education program are laid out here. And you'll see they're, as broad as mental and emotional health, healthy eating, disease prevention and control. And the skills are more targeted, but broad, everything from analyzing influences and interpersonal communication to goal setting and advocacy. All skills that we, hope will benefit students throughout their lives. On the physical education front, this team manages comprehensive standards-based PE curriculum for pre-K through high school. So that the policy lays out everything from equipment lists and, the types of first aid training that folks need to have, and then how our students are actually assessed on their fitness. Next slide, please. Next up, and last of these three key offices, the Office of Health and Specialized Student Services focuses both on mental health and physical health of students. On the mental health front, this team has launched and supported an initiative around student wellness support teams, which aim to be the go-to resource for anyone in the school community interested in mental health support. This team also continues to work with community partners to offer mental health services to students and related trainings for staff so that they can continue to care for students. On the physical health front, this team focuses on quality health suites that meet guidelines, including guidelines and mandates related to vision and hearing screenings. They also they continue to seek innovative ways to maximize nursing coverage for our students. So there's been a lot of talk lately about partnerships with universities, for example, to make sure we're really optimizing coverage for students across the district. Go on to the next slide, please. For several reasons, we are this year considering or undergoing kind of a process of comprehensive review of ADF, and we are proposing a suite of edits. The next slide lays out why we are revising this policy. First, we need to comply with COMAR and, as I mentioned, with federal school meals legislation. Even though this policy, as you see, is much farther reaching than just nutrition and food and meal operations, the school meals policy, like I said, lays out lots of elements that are required to be included in a district's wellness policy. Second, we need to address challenges that we've seen to safe and healthy meal environments. I'll talk a little bit more about those challenges later. Thirdly, we need to align language and guidance with the district's current policies, practices, and budget priorities, which have changed since the last iteration, in some ways, since the last iteration of this policy. And fourth, on a very basic level, we need to incorporate some new board rules into the existing policy and regulations. So first and foremost, in ADF, we're proposing to change a few definitions. So first, we've added a definition of health education and of student wholeness. These were left out of the initial policy. We understand, I'll add the caveat, we know that the Office of the Whole Child is working right now with communications to kind of analyze the current definition of student wholeness, and it may change between now and the time we go to the board to present these changes more formally. But Right now, we've inserted the definition that exists in the blueprint. We have also revised the definition of physical education to align with COMAR. Thirdly, we've adjusted the definition of a school-based wellness committee. We acknowledge that there are a lot of ongoing district initiatives to support, health, wellness, and wholeness in schools. We don't want to create another independent committee or council that is redundant and kind of duplicates the work of a team that already exists. So we want to make it clear that schools can already put a dedicated or like an existing force or team to work on these issues. They don't need to create something that's already happening. State law has also required us to include language around sunscreen use. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but we're required to define sunscreen use. So we do that here, and we're careful to define it as sunscreen that is not prescription strength. The next slide lays out some of the additional revisions beyond just definitions. The first bullet clarifies that nutrition and food systems education will include and reflect the cultural diversity of the Baltimore City community. This is something that we are already centering in our work, especially on the farm to schools and food systems education front. We just really want to make it, we want to codify that here and make sure we center it as a priority. A few examples that come to mind. So our farm to school team next month will host, I think it's the 4th or 5th annual African American Foodways Summit, for example, where local leaders of color lead workshops for students, for high school students specifically, on food heritage, history, social justice related themes. Many of our farm to school programs also discuss food heritage of Indigenous cultures in the Americas, how we can honor and learn from those practices in our current kind of gardening, planting, and nourishing of ourselves and our communities. So again, just codifying that more formally in this policy. The second bullet, so as I've said, we already provide meals entirely for free, regardless of family's income, and we do this thanks to basically a government provision called CEP, Community Eligibility Program. CEP essentially allows districts to apply for blanket free meal coverage if the poverty level is above a certain threshold. So we have always been excited to opt into this, and we just want to make formal in this policy that as long as we have the option to do so, we will. And then finally listed here, a policy JLCDB, the anaphylaxis policy, is currently under review. This outlines basically how schools should manage severe allergies and allergic reactions, and we want to make sure that this regulation aligns with that one that's under review now. So I'll move on now to some of the specific revisions we're proposing as part of the administrative regulations that go along with the policy. So first, homing into regulation ADF-RB on physical education and physical activity. And I know my teammates, Jeff and Katie, are on the line in case we have specific questions about this later. But we are first proposing to remove reference to a fitness assessment that's currently included in the policy that has been shown to be archaic, based on it's based on outdated standards, basically, of white male body types, which we know do not reflect our students. So this will no longer, we propose that this is no longer a component of our health and PE programs. Per Maryland state law, as I said, we need to include clarity in this policy that students can possess and use sunscreen without permission from a healthcare provider. Again, we define sunscreen as it is here as not prescription strength. So yeah, just to clarify that. The third bullet here outlines we'd like to encourage teachers to give students movement breaks every 20 to 30 minutes of seat time to enhance learning and concentration. There already in our policy was language around this that encouraged staff to give students this type of break. We're just kind of adding a little specificity of what we mean by this and a bit on the rationale. We also, the last bullet here on a related note, we want to encourage that school leaders, so For older students for whom recess is not required, as it is for younger students, we want to encourage school leaders, so middle schools and high schools, to make physical activity opportunities possible in the middle of the day where possible. So we know this will look very different school to school. Different schools have different considerations. They have different types of campuses, but we're hoping that schools essentially will look for creative and consistent ways to get students outside, moving, breathing fresh air during lunchtime. You can go to the next slide, Erica, thanks. We furthermore are proposing the addition of goals of our standards-based physical education curriculum. So those are outlined here. First, for pre-K through 12, these include age-appropriate instruction to develop movement skills and concepts, health-related fitness, and personal and social responsibility. Requires moderate to vigorous physical activity, development of knowledge, motor skills, concepts, and collaboration, and then promoting physical activity and wellness through participation in sports and other community recreational activities. So specific language we'd like to include there. And moving on to ADFRC, so focused more on my department's purview on nutrition standards and mealtime climate. First, like I said, we want to align this regulation with the policy on anaphylaxis so that schools know how to manage students with major food allergens. I'll flag that all nutrition and allergen information is already available, in our online menus. So on our meals homepage, there is a button, a little icon in the middle of the page that offers families the chance to see basically all of the allergens and nutritional facts for all of our school meal items. But again, we want to make sure that thinking about severe allergens, we are giving schools the tools to manage them safely. This regulation right now includes language on salad bars specifically. So salad bars are no longer a district-wide initiative of our department. If you have been in the lunchroom recently at a middle or high school, you've likely seen some kind of salad offered on a very regular basis, but we're no longer pushing. Basically, we use grant funding to purchase physical salad bars, and we're really pushing like a streamlined salad bar approach that is no longer part of our kind of like district-wide operations. We do, I'll add though that we do exceed USDA requirements by basically offering unlimited fruits and vegetables at our schools. So we're not talking about reducing the healthy components in our school cafeteria lines. We're just talking about doing it a little bit differently in a way that's more flexible and can allow every school to achieve it. Clarifying that vending machines must offer foods that comply with USDA Smart Snacks regulations. So just for a little context here, USDA is the agency responsible for school meals regulations, like I've said, and the federal government has in recent years made a huge push to make sure that all students, or to make sure that students are sold only foods, including snacks, that are healthy in schools. So there's a requirement that foods sold in schools adhere to guidelines that are called the Smart Snacks requirements, which lay out how much fat, how much sodium, how much sugar, et cetera, can be included in these foods. We've seen that lots of vending machines are in violation of this policy. We want to make it easier for schools to comply. And so we are basically proposing that all vending machines on school campuses need to comply, regardless of when they're operating during the day. And our department will also offer guidance to make it clear to schools what they can or cannot be offering in their vending machines. Streamlining guidance on requirements of all food and beverages sold to students outside of school meals is also part of our proposed revisions. So here we're talking about vending machines, but also about school stores, about fundraisers, et cetera. On the next slide, we talk specifically about an issue that's become much more relevant, or it's become a thing since the policy was first adopted. We're talking about individual meal delivery, so things like Uber Eats, Grubhub, DoorDash. We are in this yellow box, you'll see the factors that we've heard from schools and that we think and that we know from looking at other school districts are issues for school leaders. We know that meal deliveries through these platforms, for example, can pose or can represent a huge burden on administrative staff. So at schools, at high school specifically, if many students are receiving meal deliveries throughout the day, this can mean a lot of time for the front office staff to be managing, calling students, signing in visitors, etc. We also have heard safety concerns regarding visitors on campus, so the drivers for these meal platforms, and then also in some cases like traffic as well could be an issue depending on what the school entry and exit look like. We know that these platforms can be disruptive to student class time when students are being called to collect their meals, if they come late or before lunch period, etc. And then finally, there's the consideration of the nutritional content of delivered meals. There are data to show that school meals on average are healthier than anything basically students eat outside of school. So that's an additional consideration here. We are not proposing a blanket ban on meal delivery services. Rather, we are proposing that FNS will essentially issue guidance to school leaders, basically outlining the factors I just mentioned, and that individual schools can make decisions based on their specific campuses, the size of their student body, the prevalence of this on their school campus, and their experience. We also want to make sure, though, that meal deliveries do, at a minimum, comply with the KIA policy on visitors to school campuses. Finally, food as part of a celebration or as a reward is a component of this regulation. So staff are encouraged to offer non-food related incentives and should avoid using candy or other foods as a classroom reward. We want to clarify that staff cannot withhold food as a disciplinary consequence. If a student's in trouble, they cannot be excluded from, multicultural night if there's food offered, something like that. We want to align, again, with the anaphylaxis policy. If there are situations where classrooms include students with major food or severe allergies to certain allergens, we may, we'll want to work with the school to make sure celebrations and rewards in specific classrooms may not happen. We want to clarify that smart snacks in school standards. So these federal nutrition standards, essentially, we want to clarify that they do not apply for occasional parties and celebrations. So here we do give schools a little bit of leeway to include food during the school day on an occasional basis. Finally, the last administrative regulation, ADF-RD, on student support services, focuses mostly on the purview of the Office of Health and Specialized Student Services. We want to highlight that city schools will strive to provide student support services that are culturally responsive and informed by the norms of our various student populations. We want to clarify also that the Office of Whole Child Services and Support is no longer the office responsible for providing PD on trauma-informed care to staff. So this was very clearly laid out as a responsibility of theirs in the policy as it's written now. And since that's changed, we need to adjust language in the policy. We want to align this regulation with the policy on behavioral interventions and student discipline, policy JKA. This policy has a lot of information about restorative practices, so we want to make sure our language here is aligned. And finally, we need to incorporate board rules regarding protocols for students with viral illnesses, with asthma, HIV/AIDS, and the transmission of infection through the exchange of bodily fluids. We are, as we have reviewed the policy and now as we're proposing revisions, we are looking to the district's kind of more structured framework for stakeholder engagement that I've outlined on the next slide. So you can go to the next slide. We have a number of proposals that will impact school leaders. So we have a number of proposals that will impact a student's experience, school leaders' experience, families. So we have done our best, like as we've compiled these proposed revisions, to consult with various groups. But now, after this meeting, essentially, we will dive into the more formal stakeholder engagement process as it's outlined here. This has been designated as a Tier 2 policy, and so this is the streamlined process that the district is using for stakeholder engagement. So you'll see that key groups listed here are groups to whom we'll present presentations or schedule presentations or solicit written feedback if they prefer. I'll highlight, we heard early in the school year that school meals and nutrition were key priorities of two of the groups listed here, PCAB and the Associated Student Congress of the city. So we've met already with these groups and incorporated their feedback and considerations. We have also added in the bottom here that we meet monthly as a health and wellness council, as I've outlined earlier, and we have also incorporated some guidance from subject matter experts on wellness of students specifically, and we'll continue to seek their feedback in the coming months before we go to the board for first reader in March. We know we have a number of proposals, like I said, that will specifically impact school leaders. On the next slide, I talk about some just additional stakeholder engagement priorities, specifically on the vending machines and meal delivery front. We really want some specific feedback from principals and other school leaders. We look forward to hearing more from them. We also understand that there are a lot of ongoing conversations, like I've said, with teams whose purview overlaps in important ways with priorities of this policy. So, for example, the Office of Whole Child Services and Supports, the Office of Related Services, and the Office of Equity. So these are teams we'll continue to meet with. And I think zooming out, stakeholder engagement is also kind of written into this policy in one of its regulations. So we may, after kind of going through this stakeholder engagement process, we may want to incorporate some language on stakeholder engagement itself and the nature of it into this policy. I think in general, we are excited to hear more voices and hear yours and other people's concerns and questions. Like I said, it's a challenge. This is such a far-reaching policy, so it's both a big challenge, but a big opportunity also to pull all of our thoughts together and make sure we're proposing a thoughtful suite of changes to the board in March and April. So thank you again for your attention. And I'm open to your questions now. I'll open the chat as well.
All right, I appreciate it. I think Commissioner Lawson has arrived too, which is phenomenal. Great. And Commissioner Lawson, I don't know if you made the entire presentation, but I want to give you some space to ask any questions you may have before I dive into some that I have.
Sorry, you can start the questions. I just joined, so I didn't get a chance to see the presentation. I'm going to look over and then I'll follow up with any questions.
Okay. Yeah, and you can always follow up directly with Ms. Rosenthal and her team, and she's, I'm sure, more than happy to answer any questions you have. So one I had, just
Are we asking questions now?
Are you a member of the public?
Yes.
No, we're going to do specifically stakeholder engagement. Public comment in just a little bit. If you may hold for maybe about 10 minutes, that would be great. And I will make sure I read you in.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. A question I had was going back to specifically, maybe we'll start on like food and nutrition. So one, thinking about just given that there are some changes that will happen that will really impact at the school level, it may be helpful to lift up what are the types of training and experiences that we need to create to make sure all of our school leaders, as well as folks who are delivering food and nutrition services, need in order to best implement the policy. And that may be more of a comment than a question.
No, I'll just say, yeah, great comment. I have like a running list essentially of trainings and types of guidance that need to go along with this policy to make sure we're making it easy for people to comply. So thank you for that.
Okay, that just kind of connects the dots for everybody. Secondarily, recognizing that there are these local councils that happen in each one of these schools. I'm curious, like within policy, and I apologize, I don't know this. does the policy, is there enough support to these school councils to know the types of guidance and support they need to be providing? Or is this left pretty open-ended to how those are kind of constituted and arranged and framed?
Yes, also a great question. And yes, definitely related to your first comment. I think we are working closely to understand kind of the lay of the land when it comes to these like student wellness support teams, different types of student family or family engagement teams and staff. And we want to make sure, again, we're not reinventing the wheel and adding work to folks, but giving them the tools they need to be successful within like the structures they're already working with. So not a great answer to your question, but I think I can confirm that we are working with the different teams that are managing or promoting these different structures to figure out what things look like on the ground and what people need. I think we definitely have room for improvement. We're thinking about training. We've in the past not really offered any meaningful training to, for example, school-based wellness liaisons, and we should be. So that's something that my team is prioritizing for next year, for example.
Phenomenal. And then with the meal delivery services, within the confines of the policy, are there any restraints or any kind of guardrails, I guess, guardrails and safeguards that give our families just kind of confidence around understanding that these delivery services aren't meant to supplant or supplement what's actually being offered in the course of the 9 to 5 school day or 9 to 3 school day, versus these are things that students may order outside. So meaning that these are not actions that school leaders are taking to augment their lunch programs.
Yeah, that's a good point. We do not, this is guidance that does not exist yet, so we're building it, and that I think is an important consideration. Like we haven't necessarily outlined exactly what the guidance should say to families and how we are getting this guidance and information to families. I'll say that when we benchmarked and looked at what other districts were saying, I saw it kind of everywhere. I saw it on individual schools' websites, on, in the beginning of the year mailer. And so thinking about what the messaging needs to be and also importantly, how it's getting to families, I think will be really important. So that's a great point that I think we can be clear about. Yeah.
Appreciate that. Yeah, that consideration. And then last, this goes to the team that works with physical fitness. Given that there's changes to evidence-based fitness assessment language there, it may be helpful to clarify in some point in time in the presentation, then therefore what? Like what are kind of the standards that we do want to see? It is not as kind of clear within the confines of the presentation so that the public feels confident that absent this, we do have a suite of things that are required by COMAR as well as what the district would like to see.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know that team was confident that we do have those, within COMAR, within the curriculum, we do have those. We do have like a built-in assessment framework, but I think that would make a lot of sense to add that more explicitly here. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Commissioner Lawson, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay. And because I like to think about like the opportunities for kind of just illustrative opportunities. I know last year where there was the our lunch workers and the entire exhibit that we did, maybe an opportunity to kind of lift up the work that transpires within city schools to really serve each and every one of our students. And so to the extent that we have those assets to point to from last year, it may create some space and opportunity either from in dialogue or conversation or other things that we can point to that really do talk about the role of making sure each and every one of our kids eat nutritiously.
Thank you for that.
All right, that's it. I think that's all we have, Ms. Rosenthal. And then members of the public, I will get to just your comments in just a minute, and Ms. Rosenthal will stick around to help field some of those questions this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to compliance reports. So we have under 3.01, it's JBA. This is non-discrimination of students. This is an annual report that comes. I have a question for staff, and I'm not sure who may be here from our staff who could help us with this today. But in particular, This is one that last year. Hi, Chief Simmons. How are you?
I can start, and we have others that are joining as well.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about some of the trend data there that we have here, and we're continuing to see this uptick. It may be helpful to get a sense of, why we're, what we're learning, and where the support is actually transpiring to really ensure that we're reducing the incidences of discrimination.
Sure, and I can turn it over to Katia Stokes, and I'm going to also put up the table that we had in the report, just so everyone can see if that would be helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. Great question. So one of the things that we have talked about just as a team, thinking about that uptick in numbers, we sort of preface it around 4 potential factors or areas. The first one being around the robust campaign that we had around making sure families and students were comfortable with being able to report. So one of the things when we look at the numbers and we see the increase, we also think about it being a good thing in that families are comfortable with being able to share what it is that is happening. And is really confident that there will be some follow-up as a result of them sending in and filling out that form. So we attributed a lot of it to last year. We were able to do a robust campaign around making sure families and students were aware exactly how to report and where to report. So schools received posters as well as one-pagers so that to post all around the building so that families and students can exactly know where to fill out that report, as well as making sure that families were aware that they have a liaison in each school and that liaison could be there to support them with filling out the form and if there were any questions around the incident in which they needed support. The other thing we looked at was nationally, we see that it's an increase in bullying reports, especially when we come back from COVID. Just the prolonged isolation, the disruption in education due to COVID. We've seen not only in our district, but also in the data across other districts, that there's been a profound impact on student social emotional health. So when we think about those challenges with just peer-to-peer interactions, struggling to manage stress, struggling to solve problems, and then even challenges with building relationships.
And because we have some weather here this afternoon, we may have some interruptions. So it's not to panic, but we'll continue on as much as we can, just given there's local weather. So
yeah, can you hear me?
Now we can. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. I'm not exactly sure where I cut off at.
Just at that very end, the end.
Okay, so just the trend in the data, just trend nationally, just around students having challenges with social emotional health after COVID. And then when we look at we did a little deeper dive to really unpack some of the numbers, and we saw cyberbullying was also an increase. When we unpack to get a little deeper into where are the reports coming in and for what reasons. So when we think about the increased screen time and the widespread use of social media, there's a lot, of course, increased opportunities for students to engage over technology. So just those opportunities there has increased the number of reports that we've received for cyberbullying overall. And then lastly, when we think about the context of just the city of Baltimore, we know that within the past couple of years, there's been an increase in the number of incidents of school-age students involving violence. And so again, we really think about this as our families wanting to make sure that we are alerted to any matters that they consider to be of concern, and before it becomes bigger or more egregious, wanting to make sure they're filling out that report. So 1, they're alerting someone, and then 2, making sure whoever's the school is alerted so that they can get that follow-up.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So what I think I heard is that one of the things that Baltimore City has put in place is making sure that families and students know where to report. That's been a big mitigation strategy. One thing I want to make sure I understand too is the support for staff to know how to engage in this process. Could you lift up a couple things here for us and the public?
And I can start, and I also want to introduce Quinnell Gomez, who's our newish still director of fair practices. So very much Quinnell works with me in my office, and then Katia in her office are pairing together. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because one piece we are working with principals and assistant principals in the coming weeks to do refresher trainings for staff And then there are a number of other initiatives that that were listed in the report, but then also that Katia and Quinnell can go into more detail on.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think the report is pretty satisfactory. Unless, Quinnell, is there anything you want to look up?
Yeah, no, hi, good afternoon. Very happy to be here. Just to go off of what Josh was saying, we are very excited to provide the refresher training, which will just continue to amplify ways in which schools can identify bullying, ways in which they can investigate it. And also, we expect that once we provide training, those numbers will increase as well because people have more awareness in identifying some of the key issues related to these reports.
Got it. No, and I'm appreciative of the transparency that's included here. I think that helps us to understand where we need to target and then what we need to look at as far as like within policy. So I do appreciate this because it lets everybody know where we are. Commissioner Lawson?
Hi, yes, thank you. So I do have a question. In the report, I've read about the student wholeness team and specifically about the position educational specialist 2, bullying prevention and resources. So can you explain to me like a little bit about that position? Does each school get this position, or is this like specific to the district office and the wholeness team in the district office?
Sure, happy to. I think that Katia is frozen. Katia, are you there?
Oh,
Yeah, we lost.
I
We
am
lost her.
here. Can you hear
Go,
me?
go for it, Katia.
Okay, I'll turn my camera off so that I see that I was frozen on the screen. But yes, so the ed specialist position is a centrally funded position. That person supports schools with being able to make sure they're able to complete the report, if there's any follow-up that's needed around how to support students and families. That's how that position supports schools. And that position also helps with a lot of the professional development we were just speaking about. And then that person also helps to lead some of our proactive supports and interventions. So like Bullying Prevention Month in October, that person will spearhead a lot of the efforts there. And then as we look towards second semester, they will also be spearheading a lot of the speaker series and the bullying assemblies just to raise their awareness. At the school level, there is the bullying liaison. There you go. I'm on it. I have you. So at the school level, while it's not that ed specialist, the title would be more of the bullying and Title IX liaison. And that person is at the school to help both the families and students be able to report. That person is at the school to also help put together more proactive measures around awareness and supporting a positive culture and climate. And then that person also helps the principal when it comes to investigating and doing any follow-up supportive measures once the investigation has completed. Did that help to answer the question?
It did. Oh, for me it did. Sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Lawson. Commissioner Lawson, was that helpful?
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can now.
Yeah, and then one more question. So around Bullying Prevention Month in October, can we talk a little bit, or can you explain a little bit about the efforts that we're using to like for just more publicity or letting everyone know that this is occurring? Because I didn't know that this was taking place, and as a student leader in city schools, I think it's important that we know and we hear about these things. So can we talk a little bit about that aspect of Bullying Prevention Month?
Sure, absolutely. So we usually share information through our mediums around the Chief Davis updates. We usually share information around our communication medium. So our communication team may have communications that go out to schools broader. Then we also make sure we send a packet, a toolkit to our principals, as well as the bullying liaisons in each school. That packet usually outlines specific activities that can be done at the morning meeting advisory level, and then suggested activities that can be done at the school level as well, with grade level teams such as a town hall, or we may give them in this year toolkit, they have recommended activities around how to engage in conversation about how to report the bullying. If you see something around bullying, how to be an upstander. And then in addition to that, we also provide our student wellness support teams with the information as well through that toolkit. But what I hear you elevating is that there could definitely be more robust efforts taken to make sure that everyone is aware of what's happening during that month, particularly probably a lot of in advance, so that everyone can know when City Schools is Week for Bullying Prevention is occurring and how everyone can be involved.
Thank you so much. That was a lot of clarification.
Of course.
Right, I think that'll do it. So thank you so much, Chief Simmons, to Quinnell, and Katia. I appreciate it. All right, our second compliance report is GBEBB, which is staff conduct with students. This one is important to note that this one was previously submitted with a report that came in August, and so the two are paired together. For purposes of this conversation, we have reviewed this once before. I do want to give Commissioner Lawson, if you had any questions, an opportunity to ask any, but I won't have any for today just because I've looked at this report previously.
I don't have any questions for this report at this time.
Okay, so that will conclude our look at compliance reports. I know there's a number of folks in the audience who would like to participate in public comment today. I'm going to enlist Dr. Judkins' help with this, so we limit public comment to 3 minutes. So Dr. Judkins, is it okay if we go ahead and select members from the public?
We do have 3 folks who have signed up prior to the meeting.
Okay, so let's start with those folks. Can you let me know who signed up first?
Is Erica Levy.
Okay.
And she will have 3 minutes, as you said.
Good afternoon. My name is Erica Levy. When I hear the word equity, I presume that we're talking about everyone getting what they need. But I've learned in city schools that it actually means the squeaky wheel gets the oil, or that you can reach out to someone at district level and get the resources that aren't necessarily available to everyone. So that means in order for students to get what they need, they have to have a very vocal parent, and or their parent has to know someone at the district level in a leadership role. This definitely is not equitable. Employees of city schools are expected to engage in and provide equitable practices. However, there's been no systemic training which would allow us to roll out equitable practices. And it almost seems like the Office of Equity has a monopoly on the word. No one can provide training which uses the word equity without it going through their office for approval. I'm a trained school psychologist, and part of our governing body's practice model outlines how services are integrated to best meet the needs of students, families, and school community. As part of the practice model, we must provide equitable practices for diverse student populations. The National Association of School Psychologists states that school psychologists have knowledge of individual differences, abilities, disabilities, and other diverse characteristics, and the impact they have on development and learning. They also understand principles and research related to diversity in children, families, schools, and communities, including factors related to child development, religion, culture, and cultural identity, race, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, socioeconomic status, and other variables. School psychologists implement evidence-based strategies to enhance services in both general and special education and address potential influences related to diversity. School psychologists demonstrate skills to provide professional services that promote effective functioning for individuals, families, and schools with diverse characteristics, cultures, and backgrounds through an ecological lens across multiple contexts. School psychologists recognize that equitable practices for diverse students, respect for diversity in development and learning, and advocacy for social justice are foundational to effective service delivery. While equality ensures that all children have the same access to general and special educational opportunities, equity ensures that each student receives what they need to benefit from these opportunities. And I ask, how are we to meet the needs of our students when there is no opportunity for professional development? The staff of city schools is not necessarily representative of the student population. And unfortunately, as school psychologists, we've lost several school psychologists of color. Our students deserve educators, clinicians, and administrators who can understand their strengths, challenges, and needs. But without proper training, school-based employees may be missing the mark when it comes to our students and families. There needs to be opportunities for everyone to gain skills or get training so that we may be of better support to our families. We need professional development opportunities to address the skills and knowledge we didn't learn in grad school. If more professional opportunities aren't provided, we're creating a recipe for inequitable practices and implicit biases. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Levy. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you lifting up this conversation around equity. It's a very cross-cutting theme, not only here with like the work that we're doing in the policy committee, but with all of the work that Dr. Santelises is leading in city schools. So I appreciate the comments this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Judkins?
Yeah, so our second public comment is from Laura Grubb. You can join us.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, thank you. So I'm here to bring to your attention and to the record that our equity policy directly violates our non-discrimination policies. Non-discrimination includes and protects a variety of marginalized communities, while the equity policy identifies a single group to exclusively support. Now, Ms. Stokes just reviewed outcome data on many groups of students named by our non-discrimination policy that are very impacted by inequity right now. We saw that students with disability and in the LGBTQIA+ community are subject to a conspicuously large number of discriminatory bullying incidents. But what we didn't see is any changes in the independent variables that correlate with those outcomes. So I'm here to give you just one example of a change in an important independent variable that my colleague Dr. Levy mentioned, professional development, that might correlate with these outcomes. In 2014-2015, 3 prominent and respected school psychologists, all of color, worked to bring local and national expert Dr. Celeste Malone to present to the school psychology department on diversity, equity, and inclusion of all types. This was the first time our department received DEIPD from a scholar of color. Just before the 1920 school year, the equity policy came into effect. In school year 1920, our department developed formal peer coaching programs for PD. This included a culturally and linguistically diverse clinic, a DEI clinic, all supported by our school psych supervisors. Following review by leadership, these were the only clinics removed from our professional development schedule. In 2021 and 21-22, I won back-to-back grants to fund school psychology DEI experts to come and speak to our department. Despite fully funding and arranging these speakers, my offer of their time to our department was not even entertained by department leadership, despite being welcomed and supported by our supervisors. Our policies must support us in actually getting this work done. If we want to move those numbers that Ms. Stokes presented to us, then when we're reviewing how effective these policies are, I am begging you to please check in with the people on the ground and the people in our communities about how these policies are really impacting their ability to do the work. And if you remember those 3 school psychologists of color who brought us our first DEI presenter, 2 of them have left the city since then. Our children, families, and professional communities deserve better, and they cannot wait any longer. Thank you for my 3 minutes today.
Thank you, Ms. Grubb. I really appreciate your perspective and helping to lift and shine some more spotlights on the topic, so I appreciate it. Dr. Judkins?
Yes, we now have, oops, sorry, that was the other. We have Kimberly Hescox Mooney next.
Hi, thanks so much. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay, great. So I wanted to talk about much of the same things that Dr. Levy and Dr. Grubb just spoke about in response to the reports that they were also referencing, where our bullying numbers in marginalized communities have continued to increase over the last several years. It's really disconcerting, and I speak about this as a 19-year employee of Baltimore City Schools. I was a middle school teacher for 14 years, and now I work at central office. I've been here for the last 5. So I want to start out by, first of all, saying that the Civil, Human, and Women's Rights Committee of the Baltimore Teachers Union reached out last year when there were some changes to these policies being considered because of the anticipated Title IX changes. And I know that those federal changes then weren't rolled out on the timeline originally expected, but I did want to first say we're still very, very interested in being part of the conversation. And we haven't heard since that initial meeting, we haven't heard anything about the language changes and the concerns that we had about the potential changes. And I know it went to 3rd reader and then paused because of us waiting for the federal policy, but please, I'm begging you, please keep us in the loop. We have really important insights as people on the ground, as educators in classrooms, as related service providers working with kids. We really need to be part of the conversation. The second thing I wanted to echo is that our equity policy, again, does not explicitly talk about how to meet the needs and make an equitable educational environment for all students who may be marginalized because they are part of many different groups. So it doesn't talk about being trans. It doesn't talk about being gay. It doesn't talk about being a part of a religious minority. It doesn't talk about any number of the things that our kids are up against that you can see in the bullying report. Kids are being bullied for. So we need to really take a good look at this policy and see if it's serving us. I hear a lot of reactive things being said about how we are making sure that kids can report when they've been bullied or their parents can report. But I don't hear a lot of talk about the proactive work that needs to happen. And I'm not sure that we're being honest with ourselves about how prepared we as adults are to meet the needs of kids. So for example, it's great to have conversations in advisory with students to surface issues and support them with working through their social and emotional growth. But if the adults have biases and prejudices, and if they don't have the professional learning to be able to know how to manage those conversations, they're not going to be able to have those conversations and make it any safer. It might actually do damage. So there needs to be. I'm sorry, what?
Yes, we're at 3 minutes.
Okay, if there's any remaining time and then I'd be able to speak more. There was just a little bit more I wanted to say.
Yeah, I encourage you, Ms. Westcott, to submit written comment. We can consider the full totality of your written comment. That gives you a little bit more time to expand on that, if that's helpful. But I do appreciate you lifting this up. Like, I do value what you're sharing more in terms of like just the multifaceted nature of just the policies as they exist today and what more can be done. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Judkins, do we have anybody else?
I do not have any others that signed up prior. I know we had someone in the chat who had requested to speak as well.
I believe there are two folks. How about we start with Mr. Leaf, because I know he lifted first. So I'm happy to give Mr. Leaf 3 minutes on the floor.
Great. Thank you very much. First, I wanted to commend Ann Rosenthal and her team for the positive recommendations concerning improving student outcomes related to food and student physical activities. Those are real important, and also support the comments of the previous 3 speakers. I do want to point out that many of our students are exposed to violence or other forms of trauma prior to entering school or while they're in school. And the state legislature has recognized this and increased the resources that are going to be that are available to students statewide in the school system to be able to deal with these things. So we do have sort of resources that are coming in, but the exposure to adverse childhood experiences is very high in Baltimore City. And this exposure has been shown both in Baltimore and many other places to be related to school failure, poor school attendance, poor school performance on standardized tests. And so looking at how these things are both affecting, and the fact that these things tend to be not randomly distributed within a city, that we have certain neighborhoods where there's this more exposure, which then goes certainly to elementary schools that serve those neighborhoods. So there's really inequities in terms of the needs for resources at the school level that needs to be taken into account with the policy formulations. Then also recommend that there was a comment about increasing the stakeholders that are involved, and wanted to point out that the Baltimore City Trauma Task Force may be one of the stakeholders to be added besides some of the ones that were specifically mentioned in the edits. And then finally, that there are many organizations and programs that are currently both responding to trauma and need to remember that there are some schools and some teachers that have lost multiple students to violence, to homicide in the last year over our former students. And so when we're thinking about services and programming, I want to make sure that we're not just thinking about the student supports, but also the other staff that are working in our schools to make sure that, again, these are not randomly distributed, that working in some schools puts the student and the staff at higher risk to experience and have close relationships to someone who's murdered. And again, most of these none of these have taken place in the school. These are things that are affecting the school afterwards. So I think the policies and the procedures just need to make sure that they're dealing with those kind of things as well as the responses. Some of the schools have very good response programs when there's an incident, and other schools they're less good. So I think making sure that, again, that the disparities that several people have talked about in terms of both the exposure but the capacity to respond to these things are dealt with the policies that you're putting together. And so I want to thank you again for having the time, and I'll send these in as a written response.
Thank you, Mr. Leaf. We appreciate it if you send that directly to the school board email box. We'll be sure to make sure that everybody gets a copy of those. So thank you, thank you. All right, Mr. Witherspoon.
Thank you so much. My name is Corey Witherspoon. Lifting up restorative practices. I listened to Dr. Levy and her crew talk about equity, and wanted to talk about being proactive. If restorative practice is done in fidelity, I know firsthand from employing it for Renaissance Academy, Booker T. Washington Middle School, and Pimlico Elementary Middle School that have done infidelity. I promise you that it will reduce bullying. This all restorative practices also honors the code of conduct, the tier 2 model, in which we want to go ahead and make sure that we honor it. If we really honor it, and if it's on a school site and we're supposed to do it, that means every school, all 164 schools in our district, supposed to have restorative practices. We are and talking about restorative practices, one of the pushbacks is about cost. If you do a train-to-train model, it reduces the cost because one person will be responsible for training all. I work for Elevate. I'm a special program manager for Elevate, and I trained 65 people last week. So I know it can be done. So we can't talk about cost when our young people need it. Let's talk about the successes. It's drastically changed each community that I worked at. The work that I've done, and I directed all the schools that I work with. With that being said, you have to go and teach the student, the parent, then the community. Once you teach the community, suspensions will definitely drop. And again, we talking about equitability and what it does to Black and brown young people if they suspended. Also, last but not least, we got to go and make sure that we hire as consultants people who's already worked in the field. No disrespect to doctors or so and so, but we need people. We need Baltimoreans. We need people who work with Baltimore, who knows Baltimore, to go ahead and lift up, who's trained also as trainers in restorative practices to go ahead and change the outcome. All right, that's my time. Thank you for taking me, and thank everybody on here. Y'all really lifting up some marvelous stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Witherspoon. I really appreciate your comments this afternoon. It's very helpful. Not only to me, but to the entire board, so thank you. Were there any other members of the public who wanted to provide comment this afternoon? Or any of our recognized groups that wanted to provide comment? Going once, going twice, 3 times. Okay, so given that, that takes us to the end of our agenda. We'll reconvene on February 20th, 2024 for our next policy committee. We will make sure that the agenda is posted in advance along with the topics that we'll cover. In particular, we want to make sure that we do give time and space for the public who'd like to provide comment. You can do so beginning 9 a.m. the Thursday before our meeting until usually Friday. Until 5 p.m. Monday of the meeting date. Individuals or groups in providing comments to the committees may sign up in 3 ways. So contacting the board office, or visiting the board office at North Avenue, or emailing the board office at schoolboard.bcps.k12.md.us. And we typically allow up to 5 individuals to provide that public comment. So with that, I want to thank both city school staff who came today to present, as well as members of the public and those in general who, despite the snowy day here in Baltimore and our snow day, that could turn out for policy this afternoon. So thank you so much. This concludes our time together. We'll see you again in February and at our next board meeting next week. Take care. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Thanks.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.